September 16, 1992. One man made $1 billion in a single day betting against an entire country. The Bank of England fought back with everything it had: interest rates, reserves, threats. It lost anyway. This is the story of George Soros, the trader who took on a government and won, and the day the pound sterling simply broke. Let's back up. London, early 1990s. Britain had just joined something called the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, or ERM for short. Sounds boring. It was about to become the most expensive acronym in British history. Chancellor, remind me why we're locking the pound to the German mark again. Stability, Prime Minister. We peg our currency, we keep inflation down, we look serious to Europe. And if the peg doesn't hold, it'll hold. We have the Bank of England behind it. The idea was simple enough. Keep the pound trading within a narrow band against the German mark. Don't let it drift too high, don't let it drift too low. On paper, it made Britain look disciplined, European, credible. In reality, it meant Britain had quietly handed control of its own interest rates to Germany. And Germany, fresh off reunification, had its own problems. Rebuilding East Germany was expensive. So the German central bank kept interest rates high to fight inflation at home. Which meant Britain, stuck in the same currency band, had to keep its rates high too. Even though the British economy was already sinking into recession. Chancellor, unemployment's climbing, businesses are folding, and we're keeping interest rates at 10% because of Germany's inflation problem. That's correct. That doesn't sound like a plan. It's the plan we've got. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a Hungarian-born hedge fund manager was reading the exact same headlines and reaching a very different conclusion. Enter George Soros. By 1992, he wasn't famous yet, not the way he'd become. But inside the trading world, he was already a legend, a man who'd survived Nazi-occupied Budapest as a teenager, fled communism, and built the quantum fund into one of the most feared pools of capital on the planet. His whole philosophy boiled down to one idea. Markets aren't rational. They're driven by human belief. And belief can be wrong for a long time, right up until the moment it violently isn't. Soros looked at Britain and saw something almost too obvious. The pound was pegged at a rate that didn't match economic reality. Britain's economy was weak. Interest rates were painfully high, purely to defend a currency peg nobody actually needed. Something had to give. So he's just going to sit there and lose money defending a peg that makes no sense. That's the theory. And you think the peg breaks? I think it has to break. The only question is when, and how much money we make when it does. Working alongside him was Stanley Druckenmiller, his lead portfolio manager, the man actually pulling the trigger on the trade. Druckenmiller had been circling this idea for months. Soros just gave him the conviction to go all in. How big do we go? Druckenmiller had modeled a position worth a few billion. Soros looked at the numbers and asked a question that would become trading folklore. That's it? That's the size of your conviction? If you're right, and I think you're right, this is a career trade. Go bigger. Go all in. So they did. The fund built a short position against the British pound worth roughly $10 billion, borrowing pounds, selling them, and betting the price would collapse. If the pound held its value, they'd lose a fortune. If it broke, they'd make one of the largest single-day profits in financial history. Word started leaking that hedge funds were circling. Other traders smelled blood and piled in behind them. The pressure on the pound started building, and Britain's options were running out fast. September 16, 1992. The day that would later be nicknamed Black Wednesday. Sterling was sliding fast, and the Bank of England had exactly one real weapon left: interest rates. Governor, sterling's falling out of its band. We need to defend it. Raise rates. To what? We're already at 10. Raise it to 12. Do it now. At 11 a.m., the Bank of England hiked interest rates from 10% to 12%, hoping to make holding pounds more attractive and stop the bleeding. Markets barely blinked. Sterling kept falling. By early afternoon, panic set in. It's not working. The market's not buying it. Then buy pounds. Spend the reserves. Spend all of them if you have to. We are not losing this fight. The Bank of England started buying billions of pounds on the open market, trying to prop up the currency with brute force, throwing foreign currency reserves directly into the fire. It was like trying to hold back a flood with a checkbook. By mid-afternoon, officials made a desperate second move. Raise rates again. To what? 15%. 15. That's not a rate hike, that's a hostage note. Do it. Now. The announcement of a rate hike to 15% went out. And here's the part that must have felt like a bad joke to everyone inside the Treasury: it didn't matter. The market had already decided the peg was dead. No interest rate, no matter how absurd, was going to change that belief. Traders kept selling. The pound kept falling. By 7:30 that evening, the British government gave up. Chancellor Norman Lamont walked outside the Treasury and announced, with about as much enthusiasm as a man reading his own eulogy, that Britain was suspending its membership in the exchange rate mechanism. The peg was gone. The pound was free to fall, and it did, dropping roughly 15% in value against other major currencies within weeks. The cost to British taxpayers has been estimated at somewhere north of £3 billion, reserves burned defending a policy that collapsed anyway. Meanwhile, on the other side of that trade, Soros's fund walked away with an estimated profit of around $1 billion, in a single day, from a single position, against a single national currency. We won. We didn't win. We were right. There's a difference. What's the difference? Winners don't get invited to parliamentary hearings. Within days, newspapers had a headline that would follow Soros for the rest of his life: "The man who broke the Bank of England." It sounded villainous. It sounded like a Bond film title. And it stuck. But here's the uncomfortable question nobody in the press really wanted to sit with. Did Soros break the pound? Or did he just correctly diagnose that it was already broken, and get paid enormously for being early to that diagnosis? Reporter, some are calling you the man who broke the Bank of England. Was I supposed to lose money to be polite about it? The pound was overvalued the moment they pegged it. I didn't create that mistake. I just noticed it before everyone else did. That framing became Soros's entire defense, and honestly, it's hard to argue with the mechanics. The British government had chosen an economically incoherent policy, tying its currency to Germany's interest rate needs while running a completely different domestic economy. Someone was eventually going to bet against that gap. Soros just did it with more conviction, and more leverage, than anyone else on the planet. For Britain, the aftermath was strange. Black Wednesday initially felt like a national humiliation. Politically, it wrecked confidence in the Conservative government for years. But economically, freed from the ERM straitjacket, the Bank of England could finally set interest rates based on Britain's actual economy instead of Germany's. Rates came down. The economy, somewhat ironically, started recovering almost immediately. So wait, losing was actually good for us. Don't say that in front of a camera. But it's true. Especially don't say it in front of a camera. For Soros, the trade did something else entirely. It turned a wealthy but relatively obscure fund manager into a household name, and cemented an idea that would define the rest of his career, that a single, highly conviction-driven bet against a government's flawed policy could move markets, embarrass institutions, and generate more profit in a day than most companies make in a decade. He'd go on to make other massive currency and macro bets over the following decades, some brilliant, some costly, but none would carry the mythology of that one Wednesday in September. It became the trade every hedge fund manager since has quietly dreamed of replicating: find a policy that doesn't make sense, size the position like you actually believe it, and let the market do the rest. The lesson underneath all the headlines wasn't really about Soros being a genius, or a villain. It was about what happens when governments try to fight economic gravity with political willpower. Interest rate hikes, reserve spending, stern announcements, none of it works if the underlying number doesn't add up. Markets don't care about pride. They care about whether the math holds. Britain learned that lesson at a cost of billions. Soros made a fortune teaching it to them. And maybe that's the real story here. Not one man breaking a bank, but one government insisting reality would eventually agree with them, and one trader willing to bet everything that it wouldn't. If you want to understand how modern markets actually move, forget the theory for a second and remember Black Wednesday. It wasn't algorithms. It wasn't AI. It was one very confident man, one very stubborn government, and $10 billion proving a very old point: you can't peg your way out of bad math. If this kind of story hooks you, the ones where finance reads like a heist film, subscribe, because there are a lot more governments that learned this lesson the hard way, and we're just getting started.